Hello, Government B students. This is Mrs. Miller, and this is the Unit 1 test review. You may watch this video in addition to the essay video or any other videos you find if I could put more in for the live class, or you can just watch it because you want to have a review. One of the reasons I really wanted to do these is because of the fact that we don't have an interaction where you really hear me talking about the topics. For each lesson. And while I'm not going to go through every lesson right now because that would take forever, I'm going to highlight some of the really important things that you'll need to know before your test. And hopefully learning this in another way, not just reading it, but hearing my voice and seeing it on the screen in my PowerPoint will help solidify the ideas for you and will help you do better on your test than you would have otherwise. You do still have your study guides, and you are welcome to use those while you're taking the test as well. So, first slide. There we go. So a couple things, and I put on here acknowledging the obvious, but believe it or not, they are some questions that come up. Um, so, the first is the United States government is generally made up of wealthy, middle-aged, sometimes quite older, because there have been some very, very old men in the U.S. government, but mostly wealthy, middle-aged white men. Um, there has been the growth and diversity within our government in the last 60 years or so, but the majority of the occupied seats in Congress are rich white dudes. So just keep that in mind. And the reason why it's important to me is because I think diversity helps us represent everyone a little bit better. Um, and I don't just mean that like as in diversity in different races, I mean with gender as well. The fact that and even with class, rich white dudes don't represent me. I grew up fairly, I won't go so far as to say poor, but we were not well off at all. And I'm a woman, so um, that's just, they don't necessarily represent my worldview. So it's good to represent people who you can identify, I mean, to vote for people who you can identify with. So, and then the next one, the majority leaders hold a lot of power in Congress, and that's because of the fact that as the leader of the majority group, they can sway their whole party within their house, so the House or the Senate, within their branch, I guess, is a better way of putting it. Um, so because they lead that group and they have more party seats, they therefore have more votes than the other party, and a lot more of the time um, their views are the ones that get the laws passed. So if a law is along their views, it's more likely to get passed than if it's not. So some purposes and functions of the legislative branch. Lawmaking, oversight. Lawmaking, of course, I should probably go into a little bit more depth on these. Lawmaking is going to be your main point for Congress and legislative branch in general. And the big part of that is making the laws that our country is run with. Oversight is making sure that people are doing things legally and that our country is functioning within its legal parameters. Representation, they represent us. That's what I was saying. I would rather have someone available to vote for who was representing me, who was more like me. Helping constituents. If you have a problem, then it's something that, I mean, of course, not something like, you don't have money for gas, but if it's something that has to do with the area that your congressperson is representing and they have an influence and can help deal with that, that can be part of their responsibilities. Educating the public. They need to educate the public on the laws that they're voting on so that we know who we're voting into office and their stances on these as well. So, next slide. The House of Representatives. Unique to the House, there is the sole power to impeach the president. The number of representatives is based on the population of the state. There are a total of 435 representatives within the House of Representatives. The term length is 2 years, and so they have to work towards their reelection a lot more often than the senators do, which we'll get to that in just a moment. They represent a district of a state, and it's not a statewide constituency. So what that means, and I'll actually explain that further in the next slide when we talk about the Senate, but they have just a small part of a state. And the method of election is popular vote. Senate. Unique to the Senate, the number of representatives is equal for all states. So every state has two with a total of 100 senators in the Senate. Term length is 6 years, so they don't have to go up for election nearly as often. But that does mean that when they are up for election, it's a lot more intense. With fewer seats in the Senate, it is a little bit more coveted of a position. Also, you have that job security for 6 years. 1/3 of the Senate seats are up for election every 2 years, so they're on a rotating basis. It's not every senator every 6 years. It's on that rotation, and that way there's some continuity in the Senate, even when people change out seats. They represent the entire state, so it's not like a state is split down the middle. Our two senators each represent us equally. Method of election is popular vote as well, so that is the same as the House of Representatives, and otherwise those were all differences. And before the passing of the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, senators were chosen by the state legislatures. I can't say that. State legislators. So that's something that's kind of neat because before the 17th Amendment, we didn't have any say in who our senators were. We elected our state legislators, but we didn't elect our senators, and now we elect all of them. So that's something that might be worth knowing. The House Rules Committee is something that's come up a few times, and there are a few questions about it on the test. This committee decides how and when the bills reach the floor of the House. This also includes how much debate that will be allowed and how many amendments can be proposed to the bill. So this is important because the people in this committee have a lot of power. They can say, oh, well, we said that we'd give this bill 3 days worth of debate, and now that three days is done, so we're either going to go to a vote or we're going to kill it. So, and that can be an important, very important, powerful position to be in. And then also how many amendments can be proposed to the bill. So say that people have to kind of do a little bit of give and take and compromise, and they want to add amendments in order to get their point added, so that they feel heard on this law or this bill. So if the House Rules Committee says that we're only going to allow 12 amendments on this bill, then which are going to be cut? Will it be your amendment that you were really passionate about in order to make somebody else go on so that their vote can be counted on? The Necessary and Proper Clause. The framers of the Constitution included the Necessary and Proper Clause in order to empower Congress, because they needed to know that they'd be able to pass laws needed to carry out the express powers. The framers knew that despite the fact that they were doing their absolute best job to set up the Constitution, there were going to be things that come up that they had not planned on. Things like, the abolishment of slavery. All of those things are things that the framers did not consider, and just had no grasp of. That was not even in their point of reference. And then the first Supreme Court case, where the elastic clause was really in effect shown to be important, was McCulloch versus Maryland. Full faith and credit clause. State laws and court decisions must generally be upheld and or honored by other states. This is one that I remember being in school and having the example given is marriage. When you are married in Idaho, but you end up moving to Wyoming for a job, Wyoming still acknowledges your marriage and the legal things that go along with that. The fact that you can visit each other in the hospital, you file your taxes together, all of that. So it's a state. You were married in Idaho, and that's where the state law was put in, where you entered into this legal agreement. But it's upheld by other states. So it's one thing that's important about that now, to think about in the future, now and in the future with like Supreme Court cases and such, is there are things like, various rules on marriage, whether it's people, like I know the Supreme Court upheld the ruling of gay marriage, so that now that is legal, not legal is not the right word, acknowledged by all states, even those who did not want to, like Idaho. And medical marijuana. Medical marijuana is technically against the federal laws of like the drug laws, but the states have passed it. And so if someone from California who is legally getting medical marijuana for treatment for, cancer treatment, if they were to visit Idaho and got pulled over, they would be arrested, and because that is not a law that we allow in Idaho. So those are kind of things that make it, in our day and age, it gets a little more complicated than it used to be, because there's and a lot more interstate travel with so things can get a little bit iffy. But so yeah, full faith and credit clause is what I was trying to make points with that. National government. Powers the national government can legally exercise are the expressed, the implied, and the inherent. If the one thing to kind of think about is if no powers were expressed, then there wouldn't be any implied. Like if it wasn't said that you can't go outside today, like you're grounded, you can't go outside today. Well, it's also implied that you can't go to the park because the park is outside. So just consider that things are implied based on the expressed powers. That's a phrase I really want you to remember because there's a really weird question on the test about that one. Some of the expressed powers of the national government include to coin money, to make money. That was important because back when the country was still young, the states all had, or the colonies or whatever, they all had different money. So imagine traveling from one colony to another and your money became worthless once you crossed the boundary line. That would stink. So it became a national thing once the government became a national government. In relation to the states, the national government protects them against foreign attack and domestic violence, guarantees a representative form of government for each state, and recognizes each state's legal existence and physical boundaries. National law is supreme over state law. Again, that's one of those things where it gets a little bit quirky when it comes to things like medical marijuana because national law says that it's illegal, whereas state law is like, well, no, we passed it, it's legal. So at least, I don't know. The people with medical cards like make me feel a little better. I'd feel bad for the folks like in Colorado and Washington who just have it not legal, but not just legal for medical, but across the board. They might be in for a shock with a different presidency. So let's see. Federalism. Federalism divides power between a national government and state government. This is important. It's a big theme throughout this unit. It limits the national government by giving some powers to the states only, so that the national government could not have those powers, and therefore limits the power of the national government. There was a significant increase, sorry about that, in federal power during the Depression because of FDR's New Deal. And that was a big thing that some people loved, some people hated, especially most people who were benefiting from it loved it. A lot of people who are from that era look at FDR as being a hero and just one of the best presidents ever. But people who didn't necessarily benefit from it really don't like it because of the increase in federal power and making it bigger government. The federal government persuades the states to comply with federal policies and guidelines with the threat of withholding federal funds. One example of that is the states really wanted to raise the legal drinking age to 21 nationally, but it is a state law. So they were one of the things they were able to do is until different states passed that, they didn't give them money to update the interstate roads. So they just withheld the federal funds for those roads. And then all the states kind of fell in line, and now it's pretty much, not pretty much, it is a national, the drinking age is 21. Grants and aid give resources to the states, while the national government gain influence with the states through those funds. So if the states, if the federal government gives us money, so say like we had an issue and we like some sort of disaster, and the federal government gave us money, the federal government would then be able to kind of have a little more power because of that, just the influence that money brings. So the state gains the money, the national government gains the influence. When a bill goes to the president, there are a few ways that it can go down. If the president fails to sign a bill, there are ways that it can happen. If Congress is in session, it kills. Sorry, if Congress, I actually hope some of you actually listen to this all the way through and are able to tease me about that when you call. The president signs it. So when a bill goes to the president signs it and it becomes a law. Or if the president decides not to sign it, if Congress is not in session, it kills the bill, and this is called a pocket veto. If the president fails to sign it but Congress is in session, it will become a law even without the president's signature. But that is a way to kind of like still make it known that the president didn't really approve of it. Because generally, if he, and hopefully one day she, approves of it, they're going to make a big deal about signing it. Powers of the states. According to the 10th Amendment, powers not granted to the national government and not prohibited to state governments are reserved for the states. So that is something that you want to know. Make sure you understand the 10th Amendment for the test. And then there are 3 essay questions. And you've had these before, but I do still want them in your own words and newly written. So I'm going to give them to you now so you can kind of wrap your head around them and write those, write enough of it that you feel like you're giving enough detail that you'll get full points. I want you to really detail your answers. Remember, the more detail and the more clarity you give, the better scores you get on these questions. So the first is in an essay of 100 words or more, identify and describe at least 3 functions of Congress. Well, we discussed that way up on one of the first slides. So just scroll back on your this YouTube video and you'll have that, and you'll just go into detail about what they are. In an essay of 200 or more words, describe at least one way each of the following limits the powers of Congress. So you want to discuss how the Constitution limits the powers of Congress, how the structure of Congress limits the powers of Congress, and how federalism limits the powers of Congress. So that should be, a tiny paragraph on each, about 200 words. Or you can put them all in one paragraph, just make sure your points make sense and they flow. In an essay of 150 words or more, identify and describe at least 2 ways that the powers of states are protected from Congress. And right there, we go right back up to that last slide. One of them is going to be the 10th Amendment. So there is a gimme. So discuss that 10th Amendment and talk about it. That's pretty much it. Make sure you call me if you're using this as your live class so we can discuss it. And if you have any questions before you take the test, I can help you with them. And good luck.